Okay, so can everyone see this? Yes? And as you can see, I am speaking today from Daniel chapter 6, verses 6 to 27. The famous story, which all of us, even as children, have done, which is Daniel in the lion's den. I don't think there's even one of us who doesn't know this story. But the challenge for me was not so much the story as it is supposed to be the first Sunday of Advent. And, I was wondering, how is the story connected to Advent? And Advent, as we know, celebrates the days leading up to the birth of Jesus. Well, that was my challenge. And I have spent a long time thinking about it, praying over it. And God works in his own wonderful ways, because it was only this morning that the penny dropped. And I am grateful for that. Otherwise, I don't know what today's sermon would have been like. But I would like to tell you about this story. And I would like to tell you that this is set in the Persian Empire during the reign of King Darius. And have you seen the size of this empire? The whole of the Middle East, parts of the Arabian Peninsula, parts of Egypt, all the way up to India, including the Sutlej area. Can you see? It is all such a massive kingdom. And it is in this kingdom that the story of Daniel is set, in a place called Babylon. Can you see where my pointer is? It's here. Remember the famous ABBA song, By the Rivers of not ABBA, who was it? By the Rivers of Babylon, that we sat down, Boney M, during our times. I don't know if the children of today know that song, but it is set here in Babylon. And this is the setting of this story. So I have asked, it's quite a long reading, so I have asked Deepthi to read from verses 6 to 9, and she'll be followed by Shalini, who will read from verses 10 to 12. Then Arun will lead from verses 13 to 16, Esther from 17 to 23, and Nemath will read till the end from there. So may I ask Deepthi if she would begin reading, please? Thank you.
Daniel, chapter 6, from verse 6. So these administrators and satraps went as a group to the king and said, "May King Darius live forever." The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or human being during the next 30 days, except to you, your majesty, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now, your majesty, issue the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered, in accordance with the law of these Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. So King Darius put the decree in writing.
Shalini, if you would read from here.
Now, when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened towards Jerusalem. 3 times a day, he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. So they went to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree. Did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or human being except to you, your majesty, would be thrown into the lion's den? The king answered, the decree stands in accordance with the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed.
Arun?
Then they said to the king, Daniel, who is the one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, your majesty, or the decree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day. When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him. Then the men went as a group to King Darius and said to him, Remember, Your Majesty, that according to the law of Medes and Persians, no decree or edict that the king issue can be changed. So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you."
Esther?
A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the rings of his nobles, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating and without any entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions?" Daniel answered, "May the king live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me because I was found innocent in his sight. Nor have I ever done any wrong before you, Your Majesty." The king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found in him because he had trusted in his God.
Nemat?
At the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown into the lion's den along with their wives and children. And before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. Then King Darius wrote to all the nations and peoples of every language in all the earth, may you prosper greatly. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel, for he is the living God and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed, his domain will never end. He rescues and he saves, he performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions.
Thank you, everyone who has read. It was a long reading. But does anything ring a bell? Certain death, put into a cave, the stone is rolled over before the mouth of the cave, then the stone is rolled away, and out comes the living. Any echoes?
Yes.
Yes. They're echoes of Jesus's resurrection, isn't it? And here, first of all, we can see that Daniel's story is an echo of Christ's story in a very minor way, but it's there, the echo, and it is reminding us of Christ and why he came for us. But more than that, I think we need to look at the story itself, okay? And when we look at the story, we find that there are 3 points of view in this story. And when you look at these 3 points of view, you will see that there are actually 3 perspectives about our own lives. So what are these 3 points of view? The first one is the perspective of the satraps. Now, satraps, as we know, were very powerful men. And yet, in their power, they were so insecure because of Daniel's position, his uprightness. How often do you see powerful men come together unanimously? But all of them came together unanimously, and they agreed to do what? They agreed to harm Daniel, right? And as a result of this, they went to Darius and they managed to manipulate the situation such that finally Daniel was thrown to the lions. Let's look at our own lives. How often have we misused our powers? How often have we manipulated people to get what we want? Isn't this common? But it's a question we need to ask ourselves at this time of Advent. The second is Darius. Darius the Mede is one of the most powerful kings of all time, one of the first empires ever established. And this great, powerful king gets manipulated. One would have thought that a king who is so big and so huge would be smart enough to see through what was being done here, but he didn't. And as a result, he was forced into a position where he had to throw Daniel to the lions. Is this what we should also permit ourselves to do? And if we are the king, as Darius was, should he have stood and allowed this to happen when he knew that what was being done was unfair? How often do we allow ourselves to be manipulated? How often do we allow people to come and make us do what they want to do? It happens in our lives, doesn't it? We need to look at that. The next one is Daniel himself. Now, Daniel represents the ideal of faithfulness, as we all know. Daniel, who did not bow down. Daniel, who, despite the fact that he was told that this edict has been ordered, the first thing he did was he went and he prayed against all the orders, because he knew this is what I have to do. And yet, Daniel had to pay the price for it, didn't he? Daniel, we could see as the model of innocent suffering. And I'm sure if each one of us looks at our lives and we examine our lives, there have been instances where we have also faced this injustice. In fact, I would love if somebody would share their story at the end. So we have here three perspectives which can apply to our lives, right? And yet, this story seems to have a bit of a fairy tale ending, doesn't it? The three parties have a role reversal. You have here, Daniel is now rescued from the lion's den, correct? The manipulators meet their just deserts. And Darius becomes the firm king he should have been right at the start. It is a story of hope, a story that things will change for the better. And this hope is what Advent is all about, isn't it? The hope that life will be better because our Lord will come. At this time of the pandemic, heaven knows we need hope. We need to know that there is a chance for the future. And we need to know that someday we can come together soon and we'll be able to celebrate Christmas, we'll be able to Christmas carols, we'll be able to have our Sunday services without having to wear masks and be scared. I believe that Daniel 6 is a story of self-reflection. A self-reflection that is a very important part of Advent. So what are the other things we learn from this story? Well, there are a number of things which we can still apply to ourselves. The first one is that we are displaced. Daniel was displaced, wasn't he? He was a stranger in a foreign land. And even though he was very powerful, he was still different, wasn't he? And isn't that the story of our lives? I don't know. Very often I have been told, you're different. Peter said this. He said, I urge you as aliens and exiles to abstain from the desires of the flesh that wage war against the soul. Conduct yourselves honorably among the Gentiles, so that though they malign you as evildoers, they may see your honorable deeds and glorify God when he comes to judge. We are displaced, we are different. How many of you know that Maggi sauce advertisement. We had it when we were children. And the key words in that was, it's different. Well, we should be different too. Because we are called upon to follow a way of life that unfortunately today is not the norm. And yet, that doesn't mean, somehow people seem to feel that because of our faith, we cannot be part of a culture. Why not? Daniel adapted to that culture really well. He participated in it and he thrived in it. However, there are times when, as I said, our difference has to come into play. For example, there was a time when, we were doing an outreach program in our school and we had got blankets to donate to the poor and we went to a temple to give it. Now, when we went there, the priest was very gracious and he had organized prasad for us. But we are told that that is not the correct thing for us to do. And yet, there is no need for us to be rude. So I said a small prayer for wisdom and somehow God gave me the words to say. And I told the priest very humbly, I said, if I were to accept this, it would be to dishonor your God because I would be taking something from your God when I worship another God. And because of that, he was very gracious and he did not, insist that one had to take it. So yes, we are called upon to be different sometimes, but how we go about it must be in a gracious way. It's a time of giving, isn't it? But it's not like other times I've seen when people are giving, but mostly they are giving to the very powerful people. And the giving is more a way of making their own, establishing themselves with somebody powerful and getting themselves into their favor. That's not what Christmas is about, is it? Christmas is different. Christmas is about giving of ourselves and giving to those who do not have. For example, now what you're looking at is in our school right now, we have begun our annual tradition, which is called a fistful of rice, in which we ask all our children, will you contribute some stores, some rations, which we then ourselves go and we distribute. And we're very blessed in that our old boys always partner us in this. And whatever we collect, they give us an equal amount. So last year we got a ton of rice and pulses, which were then distributed to Sector 32 Hospital and the PGI for those langars they have for the families of patients. So you see, it is a time to give of ourselves and of our resources. And especially at this time of the pandemic, heaven knows this is needed. Then what about our own church being different? Christmas carols, we were just discussing it. But we, instead of going to our own church's homes, we go to the homes of those who would love to hear about Christmas. And the whole church gets together and goes. And I find that such a lovely tradition in CBF. To reach out and bring God's news to those who are not familiar with it. This is what it's all about. And this way, Daniel too was different, right? Sometimes, however, things don't always go our way and there isn't a fairy tale ending, is there? Sometimes we are devoured. Here you have Jeremiah, Prophet Jeremiah, and it's reminiscent of the prophet of Stephen when they were stoned to death. Jesus himself died on that cross in agony. And then there is this man called Dietrich Bonhoeffer. He was a German pastor in World War II who stood up to Hitler. And because he stood up to Hitler, he was executed. It's not always a fairy tale ending. Sometimes the story ends sadly. But even with these sad endings, there is hope. After all, don't forget, because of our Lord's sacrifice, we have a chance of salvation. We have a chance to come close to our God again. Because of what Dietrich Bonhoeffer did, so many people lived. Jeremiah brought hope. In any case, the point is the same. It isn't about our safety and comfort. It's about faithfulness, and it's about God's glory that the story is about. This is what we are called upon to do, to be faithful and to honor our God. The rest we leave to God. He has his own purpose for our lives, and we stand in the belief that that purpose will be fulfilled through our lives if we are faithful. But we must also question ourselves. How are we going to react during a moment of crisis? Are we going to blame God? Or are we going to trust him for deliverance? This is one of the key questions that the story of Daniel raises, right? Are we going to be like the woman who in all faith reached out and touched the hem of Jesus and was healed? Are we like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who walked into that fire because they would not bow down? That's a question we need to ask ourselves, especially at this moment when there is a pandemic which has covered the globe. Today, I received a very interesting forward which said that if you were to get together all this virus and weigh it, all the viruses of the world which are there right now and weigh them, it would be 1 gram. 1 gram of virus has brought the world to its knees. The biggest problem we may face in our defining moments is how we react when they occur. That is the question that lies before us, right? What is going to happen when we are faced with a crisis? While some people are unable to cope, they experience loneliness and depression. Others have developed coping strategies. A big coping strategy is our faith in God, trusting in him that he will bring us through this. I remember when Sushant got the virus, how terrified I was. For 24 hours, I struggled with anxiety, with panic attacks. It was terrifying. And I was in a state where I couldn't move. I was curled up on my bed in a fetal position. I was so scared because he's got asthma and I wasn't sure how it was going to affect him. We all know how it hits the lungs. But then, just through prayer, I was able to find a measure of peace and come out of it and be able to look after him and my family. We are defined by how we respond in a moment of crisis. Which brings us to crisis, as we know, demands change. How are we going to handle change? Let's look at Daniel. I personally think that there are 3 things that define how we will handle change. The first one is character. Character is very important. But character, remember, is built 1 brick at a time. And it is defined by the choices we make. It is the choices we'll make that will determine the character that ultimately defines us. Have a look at Daniel. When he was offered food and wine, which had been offered to idols, he took a stand. He says, no, I won't eat it. When God revealed Nebuchadnezzar's dream to Daniel in the night, he did not take credit for his wisdom. Instead, he praised God. He could have easily chose to use the situation to make himself more powerful, but he didn't. Right? And now when he was the administrator of a huge Persian realm and this order came out, he chose to go and pray. Character is built by choices. It's examination time now, kids. during the online exams? How are we handling what is before us? Are we answering honestly, or are we referring to our books? Some people have been allowed open book tests, but for those of us who haven't, how are we, what choices are we making? In our workplaces, what choices are we making? When we are faced with temptation, what choices are we making? I'm very proud of Sushant, actually. Once I remember he was caught for a traffic offense. And the gentleman who caught him was indirectly offering to let him off, provided he received some kind of payment for services rendered. And Sushant kept saying, no, you challan me. The man was flabbergasted. He was like, nahi, nahi, sir, hum to agreement reach sakte, compromise reach kar sakte hum. And Sushant steadfastly stood there and said, challan me. And finally, the man got so fed up, he says, jao, sir, jao. Aapke jaise bahut kam log hote hain. What choices do we make? They will define our character. Now, some of us at the end of all my questions might be saying, oh no, I'm in trouble. My character is useless. Not so. Can character be changed? Yes. Thank God it can. Ephesians says, put off your old self, right? Put off your old self and put on the new person created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness. Even now, we can redefine our characters. That is another choice that lies in front of us. Every moment of every day we choose. And this is the $1 million question sometimes Maher fights with me about. When things are going bad, he'll say, where's your God? And I say, what choice did you make? We either want free will, or when things are going against us, then suddenly we're puppets of God. You've got to make a stand. Choose. Either you're a puppet of God or you're going to make a choice. And you have free will. God has given us free will. Let us exercise it wisely and well. The next thing which I believe is really important is commitment. Look at Daniel, right? Daniel made a lifetime commitment to live as a child of God. And he sealed that commitment by choosing to pray 3 times a day to his God. When we make commitments, what are we doing? We are anchoring ourselves against the winds of change. Have you thought about it? We are anchoring ourselves against the winds of change. It's a commitment that reminds us that God comes first. If we can make this commitment, if we can decide that this is going to be my prayer time, this is going to be my quiet time, I am going to spend some time with God's word every day, that is when we will see the difference in our lives. And our character will build even more, and our choices will be the right ones because we will have God's wisdom on our side. And the third most important one is, I believe, is faith. Without faith, we can't operate, because faith is the confidence in what we hope for, and the assurance of what we do not see. Now, people call this blindness. I don't think so. I think it's an ability to look at the future and to know that God is in control. So if we can practice our faith, we will find our lives are so much happier. I don't say that they are going to be, I don't preach the prosperity theory, and I don't say everything's going to be hunky-dory, because then Jeremiah should not have died the way he did. Jesus should not have been crucified, right? Dietrich should not have died. But the faith is that even when bad things happen, God has a purpose which we trust in. That is what we have to hold on to. And it's not that at the first sign of trouble, we say, God, where are you? You're supposed to be the cure-all for everything. Why isn't the pandemic sorting itself out? Why isn't there a miracle right now and everybody put right? Where are all your faith healers? We trust God. We have hope in God. And this is what will finally vindicate our faith. Because we believe that Jesus was delivered up to death in order that we might be delivered from death. This is the hope we live with. Not on a day-to-day that today my problem will be cured because I am a follower of Jesus. Nothing doing. Jesus might have a different story written for you and for me. But the ultimate story is that we will be delivered from death, from eternal death. All this pales in comparison before that. Daniel put his faith in God. Daniel built his character on his faith in God, and Daniel made the right choices because of his commitment and his faith in God. You know, it's like a woman who is expecting a child. What is her hope? Why does she put up with all the aches and the pains and the weight she's carrying and the trauma? Why does she put up with it all? She puts up with it because she has a hope of a child that will be born. Just as in this Advent season, we have a hope of a child who is coming. Child who came, has he really come? But the story is being repeated for us as a remembrance of what happened. We too in Advent, we wait. We are pregnant with hope. We are strangers in a strange land waiting for that day. We are different. But we hope in our God who is going to be born, and we shall celebrate Christmas. And he shall come out of that tomb alive, as Daniel did. This is what Advent is to us. This is what the story of Daniel is to us. This is the hope that we carry with us. Let us pray that as we enter the Advent season, that we keep our hope alive, we strengthen our character through our faith and our commitments and our choices, and we truly rejoice in a God who loves us beyond measure, who died for us and who rose again for us. May God bless us all. Thank you.